Hello readers and writers, I'm MJ and it's time for my May wrap up. Once again, a different background, so just come to expect that for the new normal. But in May, I ended up reading 7 books, which is really low for me, but considering what all I had going on, I'm really happy about. Especially since the majority of those books, or 57% of them, were actually between the pages of 300 to 499. 57% of them were fiction, and 43% of them were nonfiction. I definitely have been in a nonfiction kind of vibe lately. And my top 2 categories were LGBTQIA+ books as well as science fiction, so those are my favorite genres. 43% of the books I read were audiobook, which makes sense. 43% were digital. And I did read 14% in paper, which none of that is very surprising to me considering everything I had going on in May. Now on to the actual books that I read. So the first book I finished in May is Alien Earths. This is a nonfiction book about discovering different planets within our galaxies. I was really excited about this book. The cover is fascinating, and while it was an enjoyable read, I found the first about 200 pages to really just be a review of information I already knew, with a little bit more memoir of the author, which is interesting in its own way. It's really after about the 200-page mark that this book really took off for me specifically, where I started learning some new information. As a writer, I do kind of have ulterior motives in some of these science books, and that's to find new ideas for the next novel, and I can't say that this really sparked something in me, but it was still very informative, and I will remain on my shelves because the cover alone is stunning and inspirational. Then I read Rakanan's World by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is part of me trying to read through Ursula K. Le Guin's Hanish Cycle series, as well as the other series that she has. I'm very far behind considering it's already May, so that I've just started the first book of the Hanish Cycle. And it was a slow read for me, even though it's not very long. I didn't find it very enjoyable exactly. I know this is the first book that she published, so I was really, I don't know, it just didn't bring anything to me specifically. But it was okay, and I still am excited to give her other novels and keep reading, because I started with some of her later works and I do think that they were great, so I'm really excited to get past more of her earlier works to see how she, grew as an author. Then I read Wind Among Crows by Veronica Roth, and I've really come to appreciate Veronica Roth as a writer. I've loved some of her more recent books. Wind Among Crows is a novella-length novel, and I do find, for me specifically, a difference in my enjoyment of Roth's books for novel length as opposed to novella length. Something about her novellas just don't necessarily click with me as much. I don't think they're quite as well developed. Like Poster Girl is one of my absolute favorites, and Chosen One was, I think, a top read of that year for me. But Wind Among Crows was fine. There's nothing I didn't like about it. It just didn't quite blow me away as some of her other novels have. Then I did a reread of The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. One of the book clubs that I had joined was rereading it, and I thought that this would be a great opportunity to pick it up again. It's only the second time I've read it, even though I own like 2 copies of the whole series. And I think I first read this when I recently, after coming out as non-binary, and it was so great to see like pronouns and they used in books, and so I think I personally remember it being a lot more queer than it actually is. I know the other series, that's where more the neo pronouns come in, but they're really alien based, and in this book I didn't realize that they use they them pronouns to actually mean plural. And so That's a personal issue myself. Remembering that was a little disheartening, but the writing is excellent. The plot is excellent. It's still an amazing, fantastic book that I enjoyed revisiting, and I will probably pick up the rest of the novels again and continue my reread through the series. Next, I listened to the book Something Deeply Hidden: Quantum Worlds and the Emergence of Space-Time. And this is one I had gotten on Audible way back when I had an Audible subscription. It's just kind of sat there. Probably near the end of my Audible subscription era, because it was only published in 2019. And this was a fantastic book about quantum mechanics, quantum worlds, string theory, different various theories within physics. I don't think it dumbed anything down for the reader without being overly scientifically complicated. I got so much from this book that I absolutely plan on rereading it again at some point, because there's just so much in it. If you are looking for a great physics book, then I would absolutely recommend that you pick this up. I thought it was fantastic. I don't know if I agree with everything that the author said, that we have necessarily the same viewpoints, but honestly the author has more of a background than I do, since I actually stopped studying physics. But it definitely contradicts some of the other books I've read. But how the author described why they were more invested in different concepts made a lot of sense, and there's just still so much that we do not know, but it definitely presented things in a very clear and fascinating, for me, way. So if you do like nonfiction, specifically physics books, yeah, definitely go check this one out. Then I finally finished Sparks and Tether, an indie read that I had picked up, I believe, in April. And this book is fantastic, especially if you like more political science fiction, especially queer political science fiction. The book is extremely well written, and I highly, highly recommend that if you like political science fiction, that you go pick this up. The storyline spans several years, like not just several years, like a long period of time. So you're invested in the main characters for a really big time, and you see this relationship develop and get tested. And I think for me personally, the hardest part of the book is because so much is invested in this relationship being extremely aromantic. That specifically was not as appealing to me personally, but I know that I am in the minority there, and I think that it will be so much more appealing to everyone else. The book has extremely strong reviews already, and I completely understand why. It's a fantastic book. The world building is very complex in the sense that it's like thorough, and you kind of get dropped into the world and have to kind of figure out what exactly is going on. And it's not all, like, you don't figure it all out at the beginning. As you go through the novel, there's still like things that are common knowledge in this world that kind of get brought up, and you as the reader have to figure it out. And that's why I specifically think if you like more political science fiction, that this will definitely be more appealing, because it's not something that it requires thoughts while you're reading it, but in the best possible way. And the writing is absolutely fantastic. The main narrator is Mel, but his partner is non-binary, and so it's great seeing the different interplay between different human societies that have built up in this world. And yeah, absolutely highly, highly recommend. It does count towards my 24 and 24 indie read, but I can't remember what number I am on. Definitely not as far as I should be. But since I was reading it as opposed to listening to an audiobook, it did take me longer to get through with everything that I had going on. And then the last book that I listened to was He, She, They: How We Talk About Gender and Why It Matters, and this is a new release by Schuler Baylor, who is a trans rights activist. He was a swimmer on the Harvard swim team pretty much right after he first came out as transgender and made huge national news. And then after college, he's continued to be a big transgender activist, which is where I first heard about him. And he wrote a middle grade book first, Obie is Man Enough, and I was extremely impressed with his writing because I don't think he has any formal training, and sometimes, you know, activists don't necessarily transcribe into writing skills, but it was an amazing book. I absolutely recommend Obie is Man Enough to everyone. And He, She, They was also extremely well written. I actually listened to this in the audiobook with my kid in the car while we were on a road trip, and we were both hooked and really wanted to keep reading it. There was times where it may have been a little more redundant, but that is for us, as both of us being non-binary and having this be part of our existence. And I think some of that repetitiveness is because this book is written for people who want to be allies, but it's also not like, it also is inclusive of trans individuals who are also picking this up. So it's really cool how he managed to really engage both audiences fairly well almost all of the time. So it did get a little repetitive at times for us, but nothing like too major or anything that would want us to actually put the book down. For me, it was mostly because I listened to it on like 1.25 speed because my kid was listening to it with me, and that's extremely slow for me. And that may have been why it felt a little bit slower. But for the most part, it was fantastic. You can definitely tell where his experience come into play. I do like that he includes the entire gender spectrum, including non-binary voices, although he definitely uses being a trans man as an example more often than not, but that makes sense since that is his experience and where he's coming from, and that's his voice in the book. While it's not the only book somebody should read on being transgender, I do think it is a very important inclusion into the work. I mean, there is a lot of his stories and his memoir, some of I've heard in other ways, some that were very new to me. It's very intimate and detailed about his life, but it's not a memoir. It is about education. It is about going into some of the history. It is about, talks about gender. It talks about how people can be allies. And so I think that specifically the audience and the way it was written is why it is such an important work to be included in transgender nonfiction. And that is the books that I read in May. Again, May was a very weird month for me, so the vast majority of the books I did do via audiobook, but I'm pretty happy with the selection of books that I finished. Is there any that you are interested in? Let me know down below. Are any of these that you've read? I would love to know your thoughts on them, and any books you think that I should pick up in the future. Please let me know, because, you know, I'm always looking for more books, even though my TBR is so big that I will never finish reading it. As always, keep reading, keep writing, and until next time.